So welcome everyone. My name is Kyle Mox. I'm Associate Dean for National Scholarships at Arizona State. And this is the first part of our Fellowships Fridays series, which our office, the Office of National Scholarship Advisement, explores some topics a little broader, a little wider ranging than specific awards or specific strategies or things like that. Really kind of looking at the different skill sets involved with becoming a great fellowships applicant. And as we'll discover, a lot of these skills are highly transferable to other tasks in life, which is exactly why we encourage everyone to apply for fellowships, not necessarily to win, although that's wonderful, but also to learn about how to apply this knowledge and these skills elsewhere, because you don't learn a lot of these things in the classroom. So today's topic is learning how to give and receive feedback. You know, the catchy part of the title was from NPC to main character. For those of you that aren't familiar with video games, NPCs are non-playable characters, right? So the characters that are in a video game that just kind of repeat things over and over that don't actually engage. We want to make you a main character, not an NPC. So things I hope you walk away today, or just, I don't know if you're going to walk away from this or just quietly close down your Zoom, but today's key takeaways that one, that we change our thinking about the writing process a bit to understand that it's both iterative and generative, and we'll talk through what those fancy sounding words actually mean in a moment. Understanding that feedback is not a stamp of approval. It's a part of the overall writing process. It's a step that we need to include, whether formally or informally. That good feedback does require some intentional action, both on your part as the writer and as somebody who's giving somebody writing feedback. So we want to be good at doing both of those things. And listening is a huge component of this as well, right? As opposed to being bossy. And to understand that, you know, the principles that we're going to talk about today apply to any act of creation. You know, so that the larger topic here is how to both give and receive feedback effectively. And that can apply to a lot of things, anything that you're creating, anything that you're doing, right? So the first point of discussion, I'd like to hear from you. What emotions do you experience when you share your writing in particular? We share anything that we've made, but how does it feel as you're handing this over or clicking this over, you're writing to a friend or a family member? How do we generally feel in that situation? And again, welcome to pop things in the chat. Love for you to just go ahead and unmute and shout things out. You don't have to shout, but yeah, anxious, nervous, stressful. This is with friends and family, you know, and that's why I started there. We often share, you know, our writing with people that we like. So are we feeling, how does that feeling or emotion change as we go up the ladder to, say, a classmate, maybe somebody we don't know that well, but is in our class with us? Are we still feeling anxious, nervous, and stressful, or does that feeling change at all?
I think it feels a little better when you share with somebody who doesn't really know you on a personal level.
Okay, yeah. Talk that out a little bit more. Why is that?
Um, I think it's like you kind of hold the opinion of people who you really care about to like a higher standard, you
Okay,
know? So
yeah.
then you won't get your feelings as hurt. And usually when it's from a peer, you really know like they kind of like relate to you and what you are working on kind of.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So there's a little bit of personal distance there, right? And if we show a draft to our best friend and then it turns out it's not very good, maybe they're judging us. Or they're probably not if they're a good friend, but we're worried that they're, you know, attaching you know, their personal feelings about us to the thing we created, right? And that's hard. That is stressful. But exactly right. The classmate, the term ends, we may never see them again, right? I only see them for 75 minutes a week. But they also understand the assignment. They understand the context. They're going through the same thing, so they can relate a little bit better. So yeah, I think that makes sense. How about if we go up the ladder to, you know, we go to talk to our instructor in a class for feedback? How does that change our emotional disposition?
That should be a normal situation.
I agree. That should seem normal. You know, but our studies show that students hesitate to use office hours, right? I actually had a a coworker who was a communications professor, and he got a consulting job to come in to try to figure out how to bridge this gap between students and faculty. And their research actually showed that the average undergraduate student felt more stressed out about going to scheduled office hours than they did about asking out a member of the opposite sex on a date, right? They would rather walk up to a perfect stranger and ask them out than go to office hours. But yeah, I mean, it's as Peyton says, I think it's a little more comfortable because they expect there to be room for improvement, right? They're not judging you. They're a teacher for a reason. So yeah, absolutely, that makes sense. Oddly enough, I make the comparison to expectations, right? When I was an undergrad, I started working waiting tables and bartending, right? Well, as many undergraduates do. I had not been an especially outgoing person. I hadn't been very good at speaking in public up to that point. But what I discovered was you walk up to a table and they're expecting you to say something. And there's a script, right? And they know what you're going to say. And you can experiment with that script a little bit, but we both, your customer and you have some expectations about what's about to happen. And I think when you're dealing with an instructor, right, you're in a safe space, you're in office hours, their job is to give you feedback. They don't expect you to be perfect. So maybe it's not as high stakes. Y'all, this was actually a really interesting discussion because I kind of expected it to go the opposite direction. I expected us to feel calmer and less stressed about sharing with friends or family members and more stressed about the judgment of an instructor. But I think you all made some really great points. So, studies on students feeling about seeking feedback on their writing is a word cloud of, and you can see a lot of the words that came up that you put in the chat or just said, right, are in this word cloud. So there's that emotional connection to the work that we create and sharing with somebody else and getting judged on it, right? Which is what prevents a lot of us from getting feedback on our work. But once we come to understand that feedback is an essential part of the creative process, right? We create, we pause, we seek guidance, we recreate, we keep going. That process will create growth as a creator, and we have to become comfortable with saying, listen, this is not in its final form. Here's where we are. One of the rules I have, when I run workshops with students is like, no apologies. Stop apologizing. We all know this is not in its final form. Stop saying I'm sorry. And that allows us then to step aside and think critically about our own work. So I don't know if anyone caught the Muppets reference here, but this is Statler and Waldorf, the two old guys that sit up in the balcony and criticize everything that's happening, right? So as I said, these concepts apply to all forms of creation, right? Whether that's artistic creation or otherwise. But we're focused specifically on thinking about writing today because all national scholarships, all fellowships have a writing component to them, right? You're gonna have to write something, whether it's just a short essay or a full 2,000-word personal statement. But the first thing to understand is that writing is a relatively new technology in terms of the scale of human history. We've had oral history and oral language for millennia, but only in the last 100 years or so, maybe 150 years, have we had widespread literacy in terms of reading literacy. And so the written word was not as universal as it once was. But now, we expect just about everyone can read and write. And we're still figuring out how to make this work right. So it is unnatural. This is not a natural part of being a human as writing. This is something we've just invented. And like I mentioned at the outset, we have to understand that writing is both iterative and generative. And by iterative, what we mean is it's part of an ongoing process. There is no, I've seen even in my son's high school materials, he's 12th grade, and he's taking college composition, this idea that the writing process is linear, right? We rewrite, then we draft, then we revise, then we edit. It's actually a circular process where it's constantly coming back on itself. We draft, we revise, we edit, but then we'll go back to drafting, or maybe we go back to revising. And each stage of that process requires a different type of feedback. And that's, I think, where a lot of our anxiety comes from. We just hand something to someone and say, what do you think? And we're going to talk today about how can we improve that. The other concept I like to think about, and I'm working with this right now, is we are just a couple days away from a Fulbright deadline, which is the largest program that we advise on. There's no such thing as a final draft. We have submitted drafts because we came to the deadline and we sent it, but we could have revised that thing until the end of time, right? So the meme here, is addressing a behavior that I hear from students all the time who say, oh yeah, I'll get started on it next week. I do my best writing under pressure, which I don't buy, because I highly doubt that these students have tested the alternative, right? To spread this out over a period of weeks and make it an iterative process as opposed to just cramming it at the end. When you've got 48 hours to write something, it's going to seem pretty good, whatever you write. I promise you, it would be better. And so when we say the writing process is generative, we also mean that you learn while you write. For me, as an instructor and as a scholar, this is how I develop knowledge. This is how I learn what I think, is by writing through it. So you have to clarify your thoughts. If you're explaining your ideas to other people, that's creating knowledge for you. Our ideas grow and change over time. We have to write through them sometimes to figure that out. And I think one of the coolest concepts to come to terms with as a student is that you can create knowledge. It's not just sitting there in the library. So it's not sitting there in your Canvas shell. You can create things that other people didn't know, right? And that's a pretty cool opportunity. I looked around for different, more recursive illustrations of the writing process. And the only one I found that I thought agreed with what was in my head was this one on this very sort of late 90s looking website. It was on a .net somewhere for writing instructors. And I think this sort of hurricane shape is actually more accurate to what the writing process is actually like. Yeah, we begin with a pre-writing stage where we're generating ideas, maybe doing some research, and then we get into a planning stage where we're taking our notes, we're taking our ideas, whatever we did for pre-writing, and starting to organize that in some way that makes it useful. Once we begin drafting, we'll pause for reflection, and then we decide, you know what, I really need some feedback to help me figure out what to do next. That could lead us into a revision stage. It could lead us back to a drafting stage. Maybe we need to do some more research. Maybe we need to find out, other things that we didn't know, or maybe, okay, this is in a pretty good shape. Now I can focus on the language itself and the editing and proofreading, and I can get out of this cyclone, right? But this is what we would call a recursive process, meaning that it can cycle back upon itself. And I think if we start thinking about that instead of a linear road, I think there's a little less stress in the whole writing process. So why seek feedback, right? I think one of the best things is to identify blind spots, meaning things that you didn't see in your own writing. You've been staring at it so long that you just don't see that you've missed a whole sentence here, or that you didn't define this term or explain it. If you're showing something to somebody else and this is the first time they've read it, they're very good at picking out where the ideas don't flow. And that's the most common thing students say to me when they bring me writing. I say, what can I do to be helpful today? And the first thing almost everyone says is, well, I just want to know if it flows, right? I'm not really sure what we mean by that, but I think are we carefully ushering the reader from one idea to the next in a way that makes sense, right? If your reader can't get your arguments, that they're going to help you hopefully sharpen those arguments. If there's any problems or challenges you're having trouble getting through in the writing process, we can task them with helping us. And really just coming out of it with a direction. That's what we hope feedback does. And all in all, that builds confidence, right? So only one bullet point here: when to get feedback, whenever you need it, right? It can come at any stage in the process. Maybe you just want somebody to look at your outline. Maybe you just want to work on one paragraph. When students work with me, they often say, okay, what should my schedule be? When should I get you a draft? I'm like, well, when the deadline is, you understand what your writing process is, get me something soon. I don't care what it is, right? So anytime you feel like you could use some assistance, that's when you ask for help. That's when you engage in writing feedback. And who can we get to do this, right? If you're applying for one of the fellowships in our office, yeah, of course you can be getting help from us. A lot of people go to friends and family, although it sounds like some of you are scared of that. But my downside there is that your friends and family love you, we hope, and they're more likely to say, this is pretty good, I liked it, or yeah, that, it was good. They're not as likely to, for the same reasons that you're worried about them judging you, they're also not as likely to be, I don't want to say honest, but, not as straightforwardly critical, right? Unless it's, my mother was an English teacher, and I think it's the only time I got a B in English was when I took a class with her in 8th grade. Classmates, we talked about being very useful, or writing groups, especially as we get up into the graduate student level. I think it's a really good idea to form writing groups, getting people together that are working on similar projects, and that helps you make each other accountable. That's very useful when you have unclear deadlines for things, or you're working on a larger project where maybe the deadline is like a year from now. In Barrett, we have students who are writing theses, and we often have writing thesis pathways, right? So we have groups of students in a group together working towards the same objective, but in different ways, right? Writing centers, of course, if you haven't made use of a writing center at ASU, I strongly encourage that. Barrett has its own writing center. There are writing centers all throughout campus. These are very good for clarity, focus, organization. They're not content experts, so they can't tell you, what the third chapter of James Joyce's Ulysses really means. That's not what their job is. Instructors, it would be better for content things. And when we have applicants that are working on specific fellowships that require content knowledge, we usually encourage them, work with your faculty on this. And we organize a lot of peer review workshops as well, which I think are a great way to get feedback from other people who understand what you're going through. So when we do have organized structures for feedback, our objective is to get you feedback, meaning input on what to do with this text that preserves, the personal and emotional energy you put into this, that it remains you, it remains yours, it remains your voice, doesn't change that. Encourages you to move in new directions, so building that confidence to try new things, and leaves you at the end feeling excited and ready to get back to work. So you leave a feedback session going, okay, I know what I want to do next. If we haven't done that, then we're not doing it correctly. So in thinking about that, thinking about the times where you've been in peer review workshop before, have you shared something with your roommate or your mom or walked out of a professor's office? What have you most disliked about getting feedback on your writing?
I just prefer the honesty. It helps you get there quicker. It stops all the other, like the family where, that looks pretty good. Let's not get into it. No, let's get into it because that's what I'm here for.
Right, right. So yeah, what I'm hearing you say is you don't like it when they're wasting your time by kind of giving you, what we would say blowing, just blowing sunshine, right? You
Yeah.
want to hear like, what do I really need to work on here? Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's what my experience with students is like they prefer the directness, right? Peyton points out getting conflicting answers and how to improve writing because it leaves me more confused about what improvements to make. Yeah, absolutely. And that even happens in our office as students are working on things where they'll come to me and then the next week they'll go to somebody else and they're like, wait a second, Dr. Stoff said I should do this and Dr. Mock said I should do that. I don't understand. That is hard to deal with, right? And part of that, and we'll talk a little bit about, how to deal with that, is understanding where, what's underlying that suggestion. If they're both pointing to your introduction, but they're giving you different suggestions, something needs to be done with the introduction, right? If it's a simple matter of like, I think you need more descriptive language, the other person says, I don't think you're doing enough, that might just be a matter of taste, right? And so we've got to really think, who's my audience, right? So we do have to think critically through that. And I have an MFA, Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, which means 2.5 years of nothing but peer review workshop, right? Which has its own emotional toll. And that was the name of the game. You'd get 12 different opinions on everything that you wrote sometimes. What are some other things we dislike about getting feedback on our writing? How do we feel when we give our writing, we know what it is we are trying to say, and the person we gave it to just doesn't see that? How often does that happen to us?
I'd have to revert back to work for that, but most often.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would agree. And it can be a little defeating, right? But ultimately, that's what we're trying to get, right? Was we're trying to get that feedback, like, here are my intentions. Here's how I've tried to execute it. Are we getting there, right? And one of them, I think, the most insightful fortunes I've ever gotten in a China in a fortune cookie. Said, you know, accept criticism as the artist does. And what I interpreted that to mean, as somebody who's been through an arts training program, is listen with respect to everything that's been said, but you decide ultimately how to apply it, if at all, right? So I think there are some false narratives that come out of that tradition. You know, the tradition in creative writing workshops grew out of the Iowa Writers Workshop, which was the first academic creative writing workshop in the US. It got started really after World War II, and we had tons and tons of soldiers making use of the GI Bill and going back to college, and the college enrollment was at an all-time high. And a lot of those returning soldiers wanted to start writing about their experiences. And so the process that they developed was you turn in a story or a poem or book chapter a week ahead of time. Everyone reads it. You get together, 12 of you or so, and everyone takes turns telling you what they think about it. You have to sit there, not say anything except thank you at the end, right? That's the tradition I was brought up in. And quite frankly, I found it completely dissatisfying, right? Because that pressure makes you feel like you need to accept all of the feedback that you're given, which isn't true. You need to listen to it, but you don't need to accept all of it, because if you try to do that, you'll end up writing something pretty bland. If you write something that makes everyone happy, you know, ultimately it's not great. And that this idea that we must lose the ego and not take things personally and be thick-skinned about this revision. Yeah, I think we need to be mature enough to not get mad when somebody says that, you know, your thesis isn't clear. But at the same time, you know, it doesn't mean we have to sit there and be able to take abuse, right? And so we need to do this respectfully in a way that builds up the writer and builds up the creator, right? And so I eventually quit taking workshops in my master's program because I didn't find them useful anymore, because really everyone was just trying to write the one story that would make everyone happy. And frankly, I didn't care what they thought. So there are ways to be unhelpful as a responder, right? As a reader. Like we said, you know, this being your Aunt Susie and saying, I love this. This was great. You did a great job, right? That's not helpful. Like, you know, it's not great. You know, this isn't finished, right? I need some help here. Somebody that just goes through and tells you where the commas go. This is a first draft. Who cares, right? We might be 3 or 4 or 5 drafts away from editing, where we're actually worried about that kind of stuff. Like, I know how to capitalize things. I don't need your help. I'm not looking for proofreading. Anything that's non-actionable. So if you tell somebody you need to work on flow, they probably already knew that, right? So thinking about what are some more specific ways we can give that advice to say, you know, if you want to improve your flow, you could do X, Y, or Z. And not asking questions. And so one of the best things you can do when giving feedback is to ask the creator, this is interesting. What were your intentions here? Or what were you trying to accomplish with this paragraph? Rather than just making assumptions and judgments, right? And now, as the writer, once we engage in a feedback situation, you can be unhelpful too, right? If you just hand it to somebody and say, what do you think? That's when you're going to get, I liked it, right? So I think it's always helpful. And I always ask students when they're working with me, or if we're working in a group, where are you in the process right now? You know, and that was always the problem in the creative writing workshops was everyone assumes that this was a polished draft ready for publication. And maybe it's just the first draft. Maybe you're just testing an idea. Maybe you're just trying to get going on this. But everyone treated it like they were trying to judge a book in a competition. Devin just popped a great question. What are your thoughts on AI feedback with review? I didn't think about integrating that in this conversation, but I will tell you that I've been doing a lot of experimentation with generative AI and writing and sort of revision. The generative AI is very good at the mechanical parts of language, right? The structural parts of language. It doesn't understand content, and it cannot create content for you. So if you know what to ask it, and if you know what to ask it to do, it can be very useful, right? I have trained, I use an enterprise version of ChatGPT, which means it's ASU specific, and it doesn't let any data outside of ASU. And so I can put my writing into it and say, I need to reduce this down to 1,000 words. It can do that very easily. Or I can tell it, hey, we need better topic sentences here. Can we do that? Yes. Or can we reduce the number of nominalizations in this, right? It's very good at that. but it cannot say, can you expand this paragraph on my feelings about X? It can't do that, right? It can't do it well. So I think as long as you understand what you're getting from it, I think it can be a very useful tool because it can do the things you know how to do, but just much faster. Also, as a writer, not providing your readers direction. So just like I was saying with the AI, if you don't tell your responders what you need from them at this point, they are not sure what to tell you, right? They might start giving you feedback that you don't need right now. And so it's also okay to say, thank you for that suggestion, but I'm not really interested in revising that part right now. And if you come in just hoping that it's going to get rubber stamped or a thumbs up or something like that, that's again not part of the process. I first started working as English faculty, and which meant I taught a lot of freshman composition classes. And I can remember handing out papers. This was far enough ago where we would hand back papers. And I remember hearing a student say, I just want one that doesn't have anything on it. Like that was his goal, is he wanted to get back an essay where I hadn't made any comments. And like he got an A- on the paper. And I turned around, I'm like, that's never going to happen. You if I read this, I'm going to offer you suggestions for how to make it even better, right? So it told me that there was a lot of trauma involved probably in previous writing classes. So, so the general overarching principle we try to apply, and we encourage any kind of creator to apply, is something called critical response process. And this is actually a structured feedback method developed by Liz Lerman, who is actually a professor at ASU. She's had a multi-decade career as a dance and choreography instructor. She's probably one of the best known and most famous, academic dance instructors in the country. But one of the things she's really well known for was developing the system for giving and receiving feedback. Because to her, she felt like the feedback process for artists removed the artist from the process, when in fact they should be in control of it, right? And so that was her big innovation. It's trying to create dialogue between creators and responders, and really trying to reduce all that defensiveness and understanding and thoughtful revisions, rather than just saying, how can I fix this, right? Really being thoughtful and again, reducing that the negative experiences or emotions we might feel. So in a creative response process or CRP feedback session, you'll have designated roles. Obviously, you've got the creator, which in our case, for our purposes, we're calling the writer. They obviously have the text that we're going to be giving feedback to. They are framing the questions and hopefully deciding what to accept or ignore. But you also need responders. And I think ideally this is more than one, but sometimes it just might be a one-on-one situation. They should be offering constructive feedback, not just evaluative, but constructive, meaning this is where you could go with it. And you notice the third bullet point there, which we'll unpack in a bit, really only offering suggestions when they're invited to do so, right? And that takes some restraint sometimes, because maybe you see something there that you're really excited about, but the writer isn't ready for that suggestion yet. In a perfect world, we would also have a facilitator, and that could be somebody who manages the discussion, make sure that we're moving through each step in the process, helps make sure that the questions are well framed and respectful. But in all honesty, unless you're in a classroom situation or an organized workshop, if you're just working with people in your residence hall or people from your class or just friends, you may not have a facilitator, right? So the process is flexible. An important step, as it's step 0, because this could happen before you start the review process, is what we call the artist statement, meaning a short preface, an explanation of this is where I am in the process, this is what I'm trying to do with this, and these are the major challenges I'm facing, right? So often, and I said all throughout my creative writing experience, both in undergraduate and in graduate school, this was never asked for. You were never able to actually explain to people before they read what you wrote, where you are, what you're trying to accomplish, and what your major challenges are. If you want to talk about that, you had to do it at the bar after, right? Statements of meaning. So this is where our respondents share specific observations about the work. Then we turn it over to the artist or the writer to ask questions of the responders to direct that conversation, which is completely opposite of how we would normally do feedback, where everyone asks questions of the writer. And then the respondents can then ask open-ended questions themselves. And then at the end of the process, responders can ask, would you like some opinions about this? And the author can say no, right? I want to focus on statements of meaning because I think this is probably one of the things that's most easily transferable as you are giving feedback to other people, even if you don't follow this whole process. But one is, focus on the positive. One of the most common things you'll hear is the sandwich method or the Oreo cookie method. You probably all heard of this, right? Where we start with a positive comment and then we put our criticism in the middle and then we finish with a positive comment. I was also a psychology major and focused in behavioral psychology. And behavioral psychology teaches us that that's a terrible way to go about this, right? Because all it does is conditions people to expect criticism after they get praise. We're animals, same as anything else. So if every time I praise my dog before I step on his foot, he's going to learn that the praise always gets followed by pain. Same thing goes with artists, right? And so if we get that sandwich method, that's not necessarily a great thing. Unfortunately, too many, yeah, too many, great comment. Too many managers, too many employers have been taught that method, and it's just not a great way to go out giving feedback. We do want to stay positive, but really focusing on what we're doing effectively and how we can do the things that we aren't doing as effectively more effectively. We want to focus on what's working memorable, what's working well, so focused on the way that I often phrase the question when I am facilitating is to say, if you walked away from this or you put this down, what would you remember most about this piece of writing? Which I think is a really great test because it usually comes down to like something concrete that writer did, right? That stuck with the readers. Really focus, be specific. Don't just say, I liked how it flowed, right? Focus in on, I really like that use of concrete language in your introduction, or, I thought you did a good job connecting the paragraphs with good transitions, right? That's super helpful because then we learn as writers that we should do more of that in the future. We should try to repeat that in future works. And really thinking about how what the text did affected you as a reader. So yeah, we point out that, yeah, you had really clear topic sentences, good job. But what was the impact of that? Really helped me move between the paragraphs. So cause and effect, all very helpful. Oh, sorry, Anna, repeat which part, the focus on impact? Or the whole slide. Oh, yeah. The walked away. Yeah. The question I often ask as a facilitator is if we put this book away or we put this closed our computers, walked away from this text, what would you remember about it? I think that's especially useful in the fellowships context because readers are usually moving really quickly and they're not going to stop and go back to read something. They're going to read it once and move on. What are they going to remember, right? What are they going to remember after they quit reading it? So when it's your turn to ask questions, right? Again, this is a back and forth process as we're working with other people. You need to prioritize what it is you need feedback on to say, hey, at this stage of the game, I'm really concerned with the organization. And again, I do this when I'm working with students, like say, what's your priority today? What are 2 or 3 things that you want to be sure we address today? Ask questions if they understood what your intention was. Like, well, in that paragraph, I really wanted to make it clear that if it hadn't been for my horse, I never would have gone to college. And if they say, I just didn't get that, then you didn't accomplish that goal, right? Focus in specifically. Again, that question of, I just want to know if it flows, right, is not a specific question. If you want to say, I need to know if my topic sentences are working well enough to guide the reader, that's more specific. Or does my conclusion match the intro? Does it resolve it well? And making sure that there's understanding between the reader and yourself through the writing. Did I provide enough evidence to support the claim in that second paragraph? Now, when it's time to ask questions as a responder, right, you want to ask the writer some questions. Keep them open-ended, right? Not yes or no questions. I think the version of the question I ask all the time is like, what work were you hoping this paragraph would do? Or what were your intentions with this approach in this introduction? And we want to know, from the writer's point of view, what were they hoping to do? Don't make them challenging questions, and don't try to impose your opinions there. Um, frame questions without implying critique or solution, right? And seeking clarity, instead of saying, I don't understand why you, that's not a great thing. Or why did you do that? That's not helpful. How did you decide on this organization? Or, wow, your voice is really strong here. Tell me about your choice to do that. And then encourage that reflection, really helping them think through why they made the choices they did. Writing is a series of choices, right? And it changes from situation to situation. And so helping think through them. And then if you ask, if it comes to the point where you can offer opinions, stay within those areas that they said they were worried about. If they said, really, I'm just worried about my intro and conclusion in this draft, and you start talking about the middle paragraphs, that's not what they said they needed. Ask, I have a thought on this introduction. Would you like to hear it? And if they say no, then fine, we move on. If they say, yeah, actually, that would be helpful. If you slow down that introduction, it might build more suspense, right? And we can't be absolute. You don't know what effect that will have. It depends on the execution, but be specific. What can they do in the next draft? And then, frame your opinions as suggestions only, right? And me, as the professor, instructor, advisor, I have to be careful of that, because a lot of times writers will assume whatever I'm telling you, whatever I'm suggesting to you, is the right way to do it. It is a way to do it. It's based on a lot of experience and observation, but it's not the only way to do it, right? So, uh, any questions about the things I just covered, about the different stages, offering opinions, asking neutral questions, and statements of meaning? Because I'd like to actually activate this a little bit. I have if we're on our computers, we'll take a look at an example here, right? Here is actually, I was able to dig through this, and I found an introduction, early draft of an introduction to a Fulbright application, written by me, right? So written from the perspective of me about your age, right? So in this particular case, in this make-believe situation, if we're going to go into a feedback situation, I would present this to you, and I would tell you, this is really my first draft. This is the first time I'm trying this. I only got as far as the first 2 paragraphs, and really what I want to know is, did the introduction do a good job of drawing you in? And do you feel like you have a good sense of who I am as an applicant and why I want to teach English in Taiwan? So where would we go from here, right? As we read through this, what kinds of statements of meaning might you offer? Things that you noticed, things that you thought were memorable, takeaways from these first 2 paragraphs.
I like how you admit that you're stepping outside of your familiar surroundings and let them know that you're still comfortable with your uncomfortableness, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
it does.
You own that and you can work with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think vulnerability can be good in these kinds of things. So yeah, helpful. Other
Excellent.
statements of meaning, things that you noticed, things that you thought were memorable. So then if we felt like we'd offered enough statements of meaning as the writer, I would ask maybe some specific questions. Based on what you've read here, do you feel like I've made the connection clearly between how I got from psychology to studying global literature to wanting to teach English in Taiwan? Is that connection clear? Does that part of the narrative come through well enough? Josh says chronology makes sense. Another question I might ask is like, in the first sentence, I tried to be very concrete and specific to offer some things that, you might remember, about my little town where I grew up. I struggled with it in the rest of it though. Do you feel like I've offered enough specific or concrete details past the first sentence? Are there any places I could do that better?
I think you could offer more detail where you went into, like, I have spent years exploring the diverse perspectives of stories. Maybe
Mhm.
add on like how you've done that.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. So, um, thanks for playing along in this hypothetical, right? And I just kind of wanted to demonstrate, how this process would actually work in real life, and so from here we would get to a point of you asking, if you would mind if I took some suggestions for improvement on this. But I'll let the cat out of the bag, right? I never applied for Fulbright, and actually, Devin kind of predicted this. This is actually written, yeah, and real life. If you actually look up the Wikipedia page on Potterville, Michigan, I don't know if it mentions the gizzard, but I actually added a section on calamities in Potterville. There's been multiple. Um, I actually had ChatGPT write this, right? I told it this is for a personal statement for Fulbright, and I, I mentioned I was from Potter, which is famous for gizzards and train derailments, and that I studied global literature, and I'd been a psychology major at Western Michigan University. Um, how does that change things, right? As we think about what do we actually think, um, yeah, those specific, that's what personalized, because that's what I put into the chat. I put that detail into the chat. But can we see where the chat wasn't able to do the same work? Anna, I think, pointed out a good section there. Trying to find actually where it was, because this honestly, it's not that memorable. Years exploring the diverse perspectives of stories from cultures around the world. What could we do to improve that?
Be less
Maybe,
vague.
yeah, I was about to say specify which cultures.
Yeah, I mean, culture is huge, right? Literatures are huge. And this is often where we see first drafts for essays like this, in all honesty, that we have sort of a framework, we have kind of a structure for what we want to do, but we haven't hung enough detail on the frame yet. And so one of the best things you can do is to say, great, what's a book that made a big impression on you? Or is there a moment when you were sitting in class and you realized this? Or who are some great Taiwanese authors, or something like that, right? This is one of the great tells of something that's chat written, is that it's well written, right? Grammatically, syntactically, it's clean. It moves pretty quickly, but when you actually stop to read it, there's not enough specificity there. It's kind of vague, right? So we would hopefully work with the author to brainstorm some ideas for what are some areas where we could really expand, right? But good. Thanks for playing along. As I was struggling around trying to find a good example of something to workshop, and finally I just thought, hey, let's invent one. So to wrap up, as we get into, you know, part of being successful at make sure I'm doing the right screen share here. Yep. Part of being successful at offering feedback is being a little courageous, right? And I know a lot of times we're worried that we're going to say something that hurts somebody's feelings, especially if the instructor tells you this is a piece of their own writing and you don't want to do anything to hurt my feelings. That's fine. And that takes a little bit of trust, right? And it takes a little bit of vulnerability, and you are being vulnerable in that you're sharing an unfinished work with other people. And I think one of the best things you can do as a responder is say, thank you. I appreciate you sharing this with us. I appreciate you trusting us enough to help you with this. And knowing that it will come back, because the writing process is iterative and generative. This is an essential part of the process. and that, there is intention, there's vulnerability, and we need to listen to what each other is actually saying rather than being defensive or worrying about if they don't like me anymore or if they think I'm dumb because I don't know how to use capital letters, right? Um, and these principles apply across the board. I think, next time you're with a loved one and they ask you what you think about the cookies they made, try it. Try the critical response process, and ask them about their intentions and what they were trying to accomplish and whatever challenges they thought that they were having. So again, this is one part of a series. We are going to be having 3 more sessions, and if you want to earn a special prize, you can attend all 4 sessions. So next week we'll be talking about overcoming imposter syndrome, which is very common among college students, very common among honors students, very common among fellowships applicants, where we feel like I'm a fake, I don't belong here, everyone's going to find out soon, right? So how do we work through that? The following week on the 18th, we'll be talking about who's in your squad. How do we build a good network of support? How do we get people on board to help us move forward in our plans? And then October 25th will be rebounding from rejection. Each of the upcoming sessions will actually have some guest speakers. So we'll have some alumni, we'll have some staff members, faculty members weighing in on these different topics. The 25th one, we're going to be putting together a great alumni panel of people who didn't win, right? But ended up doing pretty great things anyway. So if you figured out how to RSVP already, or you wouldn't be here, but yeah, on our info sessions page are the rest of them. And as well, remember our website, has a database where you can look through different fellowships. If you want to schedule advising appointments, you can do that through our website. And if you're not on the weekly bulletin, I would subscribe to that, because that way you'll find out about these things in due time. So, all right, let me pause there. Any concluding questions, thoughts, opinions, anything that we wanted to share or say before we drop off today?
Yeah, I haven't taken a writing class in a minute. Where do you
Mm,
think it's like a good place or maybe a book or something you suggest so we can get a refresher on things like paragraph structures or just like basic essay writing things?
wow, that's a great question. Caught me completely off guard. Yeah, it's funny. We started teaching a class called Writing Your Life. I see we've got some people that actually have taken that class here today, with that kind of intention. Well, like, this is not a freshman comp class. This is not, a thesis writing class. This is just a class on how to write. We may be offering that in the spring as well, and that'd be good for that purpose. I will actually include maybe some suggestions in a follow-up email when we send a follow-up email for everyone who registered for this. That's a great question, Anna. One of the best things I think you can do, there's a lot of great places on the internet where you can just look for writing prompts. And there's even one, there's like 365 days of writing prompts, and they're just little questions. And I would just get into practice of free writing, meaning set a timer. And I mean that, set a timer for 5, 7, 10 minutes, not longer than 10 minutes, and just sit down and write, you know. And then every now and then close it, every now and then come back and look at what you wrote and kind of circle some things you might be interested in expanding or exploring later. But I think just getting in the daily habit of writing, because then it's time to actually perform, where we have an assignment due, where we have a fellowship application, it might feel kind of unnatural because we're not used to doing it. So that's one of my best suggestions. But um, yeah, I don't, it's funny, Josh asked, ASU offers a creative nonfiction class. Do you have any thoughts on that? I don't know who's teaching that. And, funnily enough, my daughter transferred to ASU from Columbia College in Chicago, which is an art school. And she was a creative nonfiction major there. And when she transferred to ASU, she actually switched out of creative writing because they didn't offer nonfiction as a concentration, oddly enough. So I think a creative non would be a great thing to do. If you know Katie Salgado in our office, that's actually what she majored in. She went to that other school down in Tucson, but she did creative nonfiction, which is really great because you aren't so mired in the formal expectations of a fiction writing workshop, and really learning how to write solid essays, right? Really learning how to structure, really learning how to write for a purpose into an audience. So yeah, I'm not sure who's teaching it. I'll take a look, but I think, you know, it'd probably be an enjoyable experience. Yeah. Assuming that their feedback process is as good as what we just talked about here. Any other comments or questions? Yeah, okay, I don't know where I'll have to look that up.
As a as an online student, I am trying to explore all options and just be able to give myself as many assets as I possibly can.
Mhm.
And I am extremely new to even trying to understand, this might be embarrassing, what exactly a fellowship entails. I know we're talking about writing. I'm trying to find a page to help me grasp this, but um
Yeah,
we if you wouldn't mind just
yeah, no problem. Yeah, I could ordinarily do that at the start of every info session we give, but with these Fellowship Fridays ones, I'm like, let's just get into it. There's actually a tab on the website, ansa.asu.edu.
Okay.
It's just called Getting Started, and it kind of does a lot of that basic orientation. And as well, if you all go to our events page, there's actually a button there for view recorded events. So we actually record all of our info sessions that we give, and one of them on our YouTube page would be general. It's just called ONSA General or General Information Session, which is a really good introduction. I don't know I think we might have some scheduled still this semester if you want to attend a live one. But generally speaking, when we're talking about national scholarships and fellowships, what we're talking about is any kind of external award from outside of ASU. And it usually has an experiential component to it. So like these two students both taught English in Asia. The guy taught in Thailand, and the young woman taught in Taiwan, right? That was part of that award. They had enough money to do the experience, but it wasn't cash money to pay for school or anything like that. So there's a lot of awards like that that are sponsored by the government, that are sponsored by foreign governments, nonprofit groups, things like that. And they're big, right? With very big applicant pools, which mean they're challenging to get. So our office exists to help you all be competitive for those types of awards.
I appreciate that. So I'm exactly where I wanted to be. I just
Good,
wanted to reiterate. Thank you very
good.
much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Oh, great. Any other thoughts, questions, or comments today? Good. Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad. These Fellowship Friday sessions have actually been a lot of fun. One of the ones that from last year, which I particularly enjoyed, was harsh truths that will make you a better applicant. Right? And I think that's still on our YouTube page. We may or may not repeat that this spring, but anyway, you all have a great weekend, and you know, do try to apply some of these things, as you're working through your own processes, as you're helping other people, and recognizing, it's not personal, right? I'm trying to become a better writer. I'm trying to help other people become a better writer. So have a great weekend, and don't hesitate to reach out.